breathing seems most appropriate. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. In times of stress, this is a really simple thing to remember. Mindful breathing is a good and accessible way to relax when we are feeling stressed. But what happens when we are feeling stressed all the time? What happens when the world is too much? Well, that can be a little complicated because we don't all respond to stress in the same way. Many people have a lifetime of experience in hardship, stress, and trauma. Scientists have documented how the trauma of poverty affects children. Children absorb the stress of their adult caregivers. No matter how well we think we are hiding our pain, our fear, our anger, or grief from our children, they know. They can smell it from our pores, like a dog can smell fear. They know. And when we don't talk about it, they very clearly get the message that hard feelings are to be kept secret, something to be ashamed of. I have said this before, and I will continue to say it. The United States of America has been experiencing a cultural trauma for years. In our current political atmosphere, we can trace the roots of the meanness and cruelty we see back to the Ronald Reagan administration and the time when he argued that ketchup counted as a vegetable for children's school lunches and that the U.S. Department of Education ought to be eliminated entirely. For some time, cruelty and avarice were masked by polite terms like fiscal responsibility and family values. But in the times when conservatives have been in power, domestic spending dropped, military spending increased, and the deficit grew. Now, I know that I'm not the only one to live through the 1980s and 90s and have seen that very plainly. And yet there's another pattern at play here. As an actor turned politician, Reagan understood enough about charisma and marketing to know that if he repeated a lie often enough, people would come to believe it. And so he lied, right out in public, without shame, about things that could be easily disproven. But he kept at it enough until people believed, and that progressives threw up their hands in disgust and said, there's just no talking with this guy. The country has been gaslit, which is a trauma. Does everybody here know what gaslit means? Okay. For those who may not know, it's a term from a movie, one of Angela Lansbury's very first movies. She was terrifying in this, where a husband made his wife think she was insane by adjusting the gas light in the apartment, in their house, and the light would grow dim, and he would say, "It's not dim. I don't know what your problem is." It's a long, complicated story, but the point of it is that the term gaslight now means to deny a person's reality, to deny a person's pain, to tell them that their pain, their discomfort, their experience is simply not real. So there's that. I will skip over for this moment the sins of the big hair years and get to our current situation shortly, but I want to talk a little bit about what a trauma response can look like. Trauma response can be experienced in a lot of different ways. It can show up as nightmares or intrusive thoughts, which are similar to flashbacks, but not quite so violent. When something triggers the mind and the panic button is hit and a situation that does not necessarily merit that level of panic or hyper alert. Trauma response can mean avoiding situations that remind you of a traumatic event. Someone might avoid the subway after being trapped underground, for instance. Someone might avoid the town and public places where their abuser may be seen. Trauma can also present itself sometimes as simply depression. Feeling overwhelmed, feeling that the world is headed south in a proverbial handbasket, that there is nothing any of us can do about it, a feeling of hopelessness. Post-traumatic stress disorder may cause somebody to feel fatalistic, have dim opinions of themselves and the state of the world, seeing themselves as weak and powerless to effect any change. They may self-isolate and withdraw, avoid people. They may seem distant or distracted in conversation. They may be irritable, easy to anger. They may lose interest in their favorite things, feeling them to be useless distractions. There's another raft of responses that I collect together under the title, this is my title, Brain Chemistry Weirdness. You see, trauma is an emotional thing, but it is also a brain chemistry thing. And it happens in three places: the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. And each of these plays its own role. So the amygdala is where the brain sorts all information. It's like the gateway to information to come into your brain. And the first question that it asks is this thing dangerous or is it not? And if experience gets sorted as safe, then the brain makes other distinctions. Is it food? Is it a potential mate? Is it a place to hide? Can I wear it? And so on. But if a piece of information comes in and gets sorted as dangerous, all other thinking stops. Like the brain freezes up, and the hippocampus and adrenal systems take over. Years ago, we heard this often referred to as the fight or flight response, remember? As with so many things, we have developed a much more nuanced way of understanding this now, and we can identify this adrenal response as fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and a number of other variations, some even beginning with F. The upshot of this is that the hippocampus affects how we remember these events and feelings and can distort them in ways that interrupt us later. A traumatic event can be seared into the memory of the one who experiences it, while it is completely unremarkable to the person causing the traumatic event. We saw this during the Senate confirmation hearings with, which one was he? Kavanaugh, right? Where his accuser said, no, it is in my hippocampus and I remember it clearly. And for him, it was a drunk night at a party, like Tuesday, whatever, right? Trauma response can show up as hypervigilance, always being aware of potential dangers, knowing where the exits are, being aware of what items around you might be used as a weapon for self-defense. Anyone who has worked in a bar or a nightclub will tend to read a room this way, taking in who has had too much to drink, observing a couple beginning an argument that could turn nasty. Teachers have learned to think this way about their classrooms. That is a trauma response. Nobody should have to think about what might happen in an active shooter situation, but here we are. And it's a thing many of us think of these days, and it has become normalized. Because it has become normalized does not mean it is not trauma. Okay? The prefrontal cortex is affected by the shift in the chemistry that happens with the other two parts of the brain, and this will do weird things to our emotional regulation. our inhibition, and our impulses. Trauma survivors may suddenly begin to engage in high-risk behavior. Sometimes survivors of trauma will engage in behaviors that seem to the casual observer self-destructive, drinking heavily, using illicit drugs, engaging in risky sexual behaviors. This is not unlike what we go through in adolescence when our prefrontal cortex is not fully developed and affixed into place. This is not poor coping skills. This is brain chemistry interrupted. Tell me I'm right on this. Right. Ask the actual brain chemist guy. It occurred to me as I was writing this, I really hope he doesn't say it. Other brain-related things experienced by trauma survivors include the inability to focus, insomnia, forgetfulness, an exaggerated startle response. Often they engage in blaming behavior, imagining themselves as somehow weak for not being able to prevent the event that caused the trauma. I should have known. How could I have not seen that? There must have been something I could have done. It doesn't matter that the trauma was not their fault. Their brain chemistry is making this distortion happen. Okay, so that's the basic beginnings of PTSD. There are thousands of textbooks by very smart academics who can explain it all in granular detail should you care to explore. I encourage you to hit Google, but not alone. Some of this trauma responses again: depression, insomnia, hopelessness, shame, unable to enjoy life, hypervigilant, increased startle response, risky behavior, feeling disconnected, isolated, ashamed, irritable, quick to anger. Anybody feeling any of those lately? Yeah. We have been traumatized in the same way the generation that lived through the Depression was traumatized by that experience. And I keep saying this because as we go forward as a community, our responses to growth, to anything that hits that, is it safe? Yes or no? And I don't know, get sorted into no. Right? This is a new experience. It automatically goes to not safe. Okay? And so as we grow together as a community, as we learn about each other, as we deepen our spiritual lives, we are going to respond like this individually and as a community. And we need to understand that we're not failing. We need to understand that we're experiencing a very real chemical reaction to a very real trauma experience. So PTSD can be compounded, just for fun, when it is coupled with repeated traumatic events over a period lasting more than 6 months, or if the source of the trauma is a person or entity that the victim would normally seek as a source of affirmation, love, or safety. It is this added bit that makes this all so much more complicated. The betrayal of trust has an exponential effect on the traumatic event and thus the trauma response. It is common in situations like abusive relationships, abuse by a parent, family member, trauma caused by religious leaders, teachers, or others to whom we look for safety, police, doctors, government. In the late 1970s and early 80s, when the gay men in San Francisco began dying, they were still giving blood because they trusted the government to tell them what behavior was risky. Surely they'd tell us if this was a sexually transmitted thing. When it came out that Reagan purposely let them die, because those people don't vote for Republicans anyway, the betrayal was brutal. In our recent global health crisis, people trusted the government to keep them safe, but some officials clearly prioritized profit and political gain over lives, and many people were hurt. The loss of a loved one was compounded by that betrayal of trust. And gay men who had survived those early dying years really were affected. This was all very, very familiar. As we watch the investigation into the former president, and we don't see any significant movement out of the Justice Department, we feel like we are being betrayed again. Damn it, that's your job. We can't trust the government to protect us from a fascist dictator or his minions. And so all of this has been having a cumulative effect on our persons. Our hearts are weary, our bodies overloaded on adrenaline that has not been able to keep us out of the reach of harm. How many of us have been hypervigilant? Quick to anger? How many relationships have we seen fall apart in the last 8 to 10 years? How many family members have become estranged? That's trauma as well. And sometimes it all seems like too much to bear. So the breathing and grounding exercises, the breathe in, breathe out that we just did, are a common way to help people through an acute trauma response. I know a man who's a gardener, and when he finds himself in a sort of a panic attack and unable to think clearly, he goes through the alphabet and names flowers to center himself. He's a gardener in Bar Harbor, and he works big fancy estates. So he'll say aster, buttercup, carnation, dahlia, etc. And it works for him. It brings him back to where he is. Others will name 3 things that they can see, 3 things that they can hear, 3 things that they can touch, just to get the brain back into an embodied sort of place. And in doing that, in getting our brain connected with our body, we can get the 2 hemispheres of the brain to talk to each other again and unprogram some of those traumatic responses. Now, understand this. I am not a therapist. I am not a psychologist. I am not a psychiatrist. What I am is a Unitarian Universalist minister with some extra training in pastoral and spiritual care. I have a fancy certificate and student debt to prove it. And I want to lead you in a little exercise this morning that will get us back into our bodies just a little bit. I'm going to ask you, get comfortable where you are. Okay, feet on the floor, hands someplace comfortable, back straight. Imagine there's an invisible string attached to the top of your head. It's pulled gently into the sky, straightening your spine. Okay, there you go. If at any time you are uncomfortable during this, please take care of yourself and step out if that's what you need to do. This is an exercise to help, not cause further harm. Serena, can you start the graphic for us? I want you to watch this graphic and breathe with it. As the shape gets smaller, we exhale. As it gets larger, we breathe in. And then out as it shrinks. I want you to feel your lungs expand. Breath. If you can't keep pace with this particular image, set your own pace so you are comfortable. Let's breathe in and out for 1 minute, paying attention to how your body responds to this mindful breathing. Okay, keep breathing now. Keep watching the video. And I want you to listen to my voice. In this moment, you are safe. In this moment, you are not in danger. In this moment, you are whole in spirit. I invite you now to say those things silently in your head while we do the breathing again. In this moment, I am safe. I am not in danger. I am whole in spirit. We'll start again. Okay, keep breathing now. And as you breathe, silently name to yourself 3 things that you can see, one with each breath in. Name 2. Name 3. Now I want you to name 3 things that you can feel physically right where you are. Maybe it's the chair, maybe it's the floor, maybe it's the tag on the back of your shoe. Name 1. Name 2. And name 3. Now I want you to think about 3 things you love to smell. Baking bread, fresh mown grass, new baby smell. Whatever it is, think of those one at a time. Think of 1. 2. Think of 3. As we get close to the end of our exercise now, I want you to be aware of the people around you. Feel their presence behind you or in front of you or in back. Feel the presence of the children in their classes, the teachers with them. Think about your feelings about this place and these people. Hopefully how this community feeds and nourishes your soul and your spirit. In this moment, I am safe. In this moment, I am not in danger. In this moment, I am whole. Stop. Welcome back. Healing from trauma, particularly complex trauma, is a much more involved process than this simple breathing exercise we did today. And thank you for trusting me to do that with you. Like I said, I'm not a doctor, a therapist, or a mental health professional of any kind. I'm a minister who understands complex trauma firsthand and has some extra spiritual training to help cope with it. I encourage you to use this exercise at home or wherever you are when you're feeling overwhelmed, perhaps not in traffic. But this is not a cure, not by a long shot, but it can be useful to help bring down your distracted brain into your body, calm it down a little bit. If this exercise helps you, I encourage you to use it, adapt it, and make it your own. That little video thing we just used is available in approximately 8 gazillion places on the internet, so you can find it pretty easily. It comes through my Facebook feed about 2 or 3 times a year. Somebody will say, oh, look at this cool breathing thing. And if you can't find that, we're not at a screen, count off on your fingers as you breathe in. Breathe out. I've been known to do that. So as we think about leaving here this morning, I want you to take with you the memory of this whole group, even masked, breathing in and out in unison for close to 10 minutes. That kind of exercise will bring our biorhythms into syncopation and connect us energetically. For that time, you were connected in a way that was really profound. And remember that when things get tough, you are not alone. You are whole. You are holy. You are wholly loved. Blessed be now.